Good evening. This is Gary Wheeler, and you have entered the zone of high strangeness, a place where the unbelievable is believed until proven otherwise. Tonight I will be taking phone calls. I think I learned how to use the board, but if the worst thing happens and I hang up on you, just call back. The number is 207-593-0013. Some of the show is pre-recorded, but I will break in when a call comes and put you on the air. Just a couple phone rules that we have. First names only, or you can be anonymous if you choose. And if you mention other people, again, just first names. Of course, no foul language. And try to limit your calls to 10 minutes or less. Again, the number is 593-0013, area code 207. I'm especially interested in callers who have had some experience themselves in a UFO sighting or possibly different kinds of interactions, and also those that maybe have heard friends or others who have had such experiences that you could relate, as well as contrarians who have objection to this whole area of study or perception. So all callers are welcome. I'm sure you recognize the lead-in music to the show this evening, being that from Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the human and alien computers were communicating with each other. A powerful scene and a beautiful score by John Williams. The Close Encounters classification that was used in Spielberg's movie, calling it the Third Kind, were made by Dr. J. Hynek when he was investigating the UFO phenomena in the Air Force study called Blue Book, where he was head of it, but he was also, his job was basically to reinterpret every sighting as some natural occurrence or a hallucination. This was the beginning of the government cover-up, and as it is going on from then to today as well. I'll read the classifications that Hynek came up with. The Close Encounter of the First Kind as being simply a visual sighting of a UFO. Close Encounter of the Second Kind is a visual sighting by more than one person with some physical evidence, such as a radar confirmation. And the Close Encounter of the Third Kind consisted of a sighting of both the saucer and its occupants, as was the case in the movie. And then over the years, as a result of many more sightings and abductions and interactions with the ETs, two more classifications were added. The Close Encounter of the Fourth Kind is a physical interaction between alien and human, and the Fifth Kind is interaction and communication initiated by humans. Dr. Hynek later in life recanted on his disbelief of UFOs and the alien presence, and testified to this fact at a speech at the United Nations. Okay, back to Spielberg. Over his career, he has exhibited exceptional interest in UFOs and aliens, and as you know, he's done several different movies and TV series involving them. And to clarify this a little more, with some interest in Spielberg, I'll read an excerpt from an article that was published in 2010. Articles by Robbie Graham and Matthew Alford called Spielberg's Saucer Secrets. Okay, I'm going to quote from this article. The first paragraph says, Steven Spielberg is obsessed with UFOs. Indeed, judging by the success of his alien movies to date, his obsession is infectious. Perhaps more so than any other filmmaker, Spielberg has molded our perceptions of otherworldly visitors. Films such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977, and E.T., the Extraterrestrial, in 1982, abound with iconic imagery seared into the minds of millions. A mothership's miraculous ascension at Devil's Tower, a boy and his fugitive friend from the stars cycling in silhouette across the face of the moon. Even Spielberg's less memorable alien movies, War of the Worlds in 2005 and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in 2008, have enjoyed enormous success at the worldwide box office, raking in some $1.4 billion between them. Although the 63-year-old has donned his director's cap for just 4 alien-themed movies, his role as a producer has long seen him neck-deep in extraterrestrial entertainment. Spielberg's credits today include Batteries Not Included, 1987, the Men in Black franchise, 1997, the epic alien abduction miniseries, Taken, in 2002, and the Transformers franchise in 2007. He is also closely involved in the development of 4 projects due in 2011, the Alien Invasion series, Fallen Skies, the sci-fi western Cowboys and Aliens, the much-anticipated Super 8, the plot for which features Area 51, the U.S. Air Force, and escaped alien entity, and the Aliens in High School thriller I Am Number 4. Of course, we're in 2014, so those have already come out, and many of you have probably seen them. I'll continue. That Spielberg continues to make movies about life elsewhere is owed not simply to good business sense, but is due in large part to his own childhood fascination with UFOs, a fascination that would intensify into his late 20s and culminate in his cathartic production of Close Encounters, one of the director's most personal films. He says, "I was mainly inspired when I began to meet people who had had experiences," Spielberg told Sight and Sound magazine in 1977. "I realized that just about every 5th person I talked to had looked up in the sky at some point in their lives and seen something that was not easy to explain. And then I began meeting people who had had close encounters, where undeniably something quite phenomenal was happening right before their eyes. It was this direct contact, the interviews, that got me interested in the movie." Spielberg has been inseparable from the political dimension of the UFO phenomena since the early days of his career. In 1977, he spoke with relish of rumors that President Carter was due to make some unsettling disclosures about UFOs later that year. Needless to say, no such disclosures were forthcoming, although not for lack of effort on Carter's part. And Jimmy Carter famously had reported his own UFO sighting in 1969, and it had made a believer of him. So much so that one of the informal campaign pledges had been to reveal the truth about UFOs. Unfortunately, that never happened, partly because with presidents, it's the saying, a need to know is not there for the presidents. They don't need to know, which is pretty interesting. They would say that about something so critical. Another paragraph about Spielberg. Before Close Encounters had been even entered into production, Spielberg's self-penned script had raised a red flag at NASA and prompted the space agency to send the director a 20-page letter in an attempt to dissuade him from making the film. When they read the script, they got very angry and felt that it was a film that would be dangerous, Spielberg told the film journal Cinema Papers in 1978. He said, "I felt they mainly wrote the letter because Jaws convinced so many people around the world that there were sharks in toilets and bathtubs, not just in the oceans and rivers. They were afraid the same kind of epidemic would happen with UFOs." And, of course, that's an excuse the government's used ever since to keep the whole UFO thing under wraps. And Spielberg continued, "If NASA took the time to send me a 20-page letter, then I knew there must be something happening," he told Cinema Papers. "That's when I really found my faith." Spielberg's most successful alien film, E.T., was also an oval office favorite. Incumbent this time was Ronald Reagan, who, like both Carter and Spielberg, was also known to be keenly interested in UFOs. During a private screening of E.T. at the White House in 1982, in which Reagan and Spielberg were seated together, the president is reported to have leaned over to his guest and whispered, "You know, there aren't 6 people in this room who know how true this really is." Spielberg related the story to Hollywood television producer Jamie Shandera shortly before the screening. I'll go on. Reagan's belief in aliens even affected the content of key policy speeches. In a September 1987 address to the General Assembly of the United Nations, the President said, "I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world." He then paused before posing a cryptic question. "And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?" Now, it's reported that Reagan, during a campaign, traveling when he was governor of California in his private jet, saw a UFO, and they chased it for quite a while, but of course they had no luck in catching it. Continuing on with the article, the U.S. government's motives for involving itself in UFO-themed entertainment are unclear, although it may be of some significance that in 1952, CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith discussed seriously, quote, the possible offensive or defensive utilization of this phenomena, the UFOs, for psychological warfare purposes, end quote. Others, meanwhile, preferred the theory that the government, by way of Hollywood, is conditioning us to a reality that we are not alone. And the last part of the article, in conclusion, in a career spanning 4 decades, Steven Spielberg has brought the extraordinary into the ordinary lives of everyday folk, and for the price of a cinema ticket, allowed us to glimpse the mysteries which flit at the peripheries of our human reality. He has rightfully cultivated a reputation as the people's director. Perhaps, then, it is time he shared with the people just what, if anything, he really knows about one of the greatest mysteries of them all. Okay, that's enough about Spielberg. I apologize for my difficulty in reading some of this. I'm one of those kids that was in 5th grade that when the teacher said we're going to read out loud today, wanted to hide under my desk and just sort of sat there in fear as the reading went around the room until it got to me. But I'll keep working at it and maybe get a bit better at it. All right, one thing I want to do, and probably do with every show, is talk about a specific UFO sighting case. And this case would be considered a close encounter of the second kind and has to do with a pilot. Now, there's many sightings by airline pilots specifically, but also military pilots. But airline pilots in particular have a hush-hush policy by the companies they work for. They are definitely not allowed to talk about it. But in this one particular case that occurred in 1986, there was so much evidence and so much radar confirmation of what was going on that there was just too many questions that it had to be brought out, and the pilot was willing to testify to what happened. And just for your edification, there's a website called NARCAP, NARCAP.org, which actually is a site for commercial pilots to anonymously talk about the incidences they've experienced with UFOs. So it's pretty interesting and a good idea that they can go there and express what they had seen. Because part of the deal with this whole UFO thing is it can be pretty traumatizing, because it's something coming into your reality that is very out of your reality, and it's very good if you can talk about it or at least express yourself. So I have an abstract here of what occurred with this particular airline. So have patience with me. I'm going to read it as well. It's called Japan Airlines Flight 1628. On November 17th, 1986, one of the best documented airplane UFO encounters took place. A chartered cargo flight on Japan Airlines JAL 1628, a 747, was delivering a load of French wine from Paris, France, to Tokyo, Japan. UFO reports made by pilots are considered some of the best because of their training and recognition of various flying craft. Here are some of the best documented cases, and then there's some other cases you can go look at. The special flight was scheduled to go from Paris to Reykjavik, Iceland, across the North Atlantic and Greenland, then across Canada to Anchorage, Alaska, and finally across the Pacific to Tokyo. Veteran Captain Kenju Terachi, co-pilot Takanori Sambuchi, and flight engineer Yoshio Kasuba manned the controls as they finally crossed into the state of Alaska at 5:09 p.m. local time, traveling at a speed of about 600 miles per hour at 35,000 feet. They were initially contacted by Anchorage Air Traffic Control to confirm their presence and heading. Their crew was told to turn 15 degrees to the left and head for Tahiti at a heading of 215 degrees. About 2 minutes after crossing into Alaska, Captain Taruchi noticed something with lights about 2,000 feet below and 30 degrees to the left of the aircraft. At first he thought it was probably an American jet out of Iceland or Elmendorf Air Force Base patrolling the skies. He soon dismissed this theory when he saw the object continuing to pace the 1628, something a patrol plane would not do. It was about 7 minutes after initially sighting the lights when, without warning, two craft of unknown origin stopped ahead of the 1628. They were one above the other and were shooting lights. The interior of the 747 cockpit was so brightly lit their crew could feel warmth on their skin. Taruchi surmised that these objects must be what he had seen a few minutes before, but how did they make such an amazing rapid move from their position to one in front of the 1628? The two UFOs kept pace with the 747 for several minutes. After 5 to 7 minutes, the craft changed position to a side-by-side formation. The veteran pilot described the lights as being a white-amber color and were like flames being shot out of a jet engine. He got the impression that this firing was a way to stabilize the craft. His co-pilot, Tamjuji, stated that they were like Christmas lights, but of an amber color. He said, "I remember red or orange and white lights, and just like a landing light, in weak green and blinking." He also added that they appeared to be weaker, then stronger, repeated this process continually. He believed lights were an oncoming craft of some kind. Flight engineer Tsukapa was positioned behind the co-pilot, did not have a good view as the pilot and co-pilot, but could still see the lights. He stated they were shaped like windows of an airplane and were white and amber. The crew decided to radio Anchorage Air Traffic Control and would be in constant contact with them for a half hour before the UFOs. The captain requested a camera so he could validate what they were seeing. He was not familiar with the camera and did not get a photograph. Tsukapa tried his camera but had trouble with the autofocus and also failed to capture the object for future reference. After their failed attempt to capture unknown craft on film, the plane began to have interference problems when attempting to communicate with Anchorage and requested a frequency change. The Anchorage Air Traffic Control was doing their best to find out what JL 628 was seeing. The fact that the cockpit was immersed in light was enough to declare an emergency. Later, after the incident, Terachi spoke in length about traffic control's queries. "They kept asking us about cloud in the immediate area," he stated. As a matter of fact, Control asked him several times about clouds. Could this have been their explanation for what was causing the appearance of the lights? Could clouds be reflecting light to the point that the crew was being fooled by something so simple? Tarucci told Control that they could see spotty and thin clouds near the distant mountains, but this was far below the plane and could not have been the source of the lights. There were no clouds to be seen anywhere near the altitude of the 1628. After the conversation on the clouds ended, the two UFOs quickly flew away to the left. Later, Tarucci talked about attempting to find the objects on radar. There was a pale white flat light in the direction where the ships flew away, moving in a line along with us, in the same direction and the same speed at the same altitude as we were. I thought it would be impossible to find anything on aircraft radar if a large ground radar did not show anything, but I judged the distance of the object visually, and it was not very far. I set the digital weather radar distance at 20 nautical miles, radar angle to horizon. There it was on the screen. Quote, a large green and round object had appeared at 7 or 8 miles away where the direction of the object was. We reported to Anchorage Center that our radar caught the object within 7 or 8 miles in the 10 o'clock position. We asked them if they could catch it on the ground radar, but it did not seem they could catch it at all. The Elmendorf Regional Operation Control Center began searching their radar to see if they could spot any uncorrelated target. After a couple of minutes, they too picked up something that described it as some surge primary return. This means that they were picking up occasional radar echo returns which were not accompanied by a transponder signal. Finally, the JAL 628 came to Fairbanks. Tarucci would later explain what happened. The lights of the city were extremely bright to our eyes that were used to the dark. We were just above the bright city lights, and we checked the pale white light behind us. Alas, there was a silhouette of a gigantic spaceship. We must run away quickly. The Anchorage Center responded, the JAL 628 is requesting a change of course to right 45 degrees. The plane turned to the right, and the AARTC controller called the Fairbanks Approach Radar Controller to find out whether or not short-range radar had a target near the JAL. The approach radar reported no target other than JAL. As the plane left the turn and flew towards Tequitna at an altitude of 31,000 feet, they could still see the UFO. Several attempts were made to send other planes to the area where the JAL was to see if they too could see the anomaly. United Airlines passenger jet at 5:40 and a military totem flight at 5:55. Neither could see the objects. The FAA and others conducted an investigation but did not issue their final report until March 5th. Several theories were offered for what 1628 saw. Among them were the CSIOCOP investigation offered the explanation that light reflecting off a cloud of ice crystals had caused the sighting. This is highly unlikely because the sky was clear and the reported altitude of the UFO. The FAA made this claim that radar images received by ground radar were caused by a split radar return from the JAL Boeing 747. This, of course, has nothing to do with what the crew saw. That's the end of the abstract on this case. It's a very interesting case, and the pilot actually was forced to get a desk job with the airline after he came forward, and he made drawings of this object. It was like a two-sided saucer, kind of bulging in the middle. In another article, he claimed that the craft itself was as big as 2 aircraft carriers. Now, there was a man by the name of John Callahan, who for 6 years was the chief of accident and investigation branch of the FAA in Washington, D.C. And he, because the whole thing was being investigated, he received the reports about this particular flight. And I'm going to play a testimony by him that was given in front of the committee. It's quite good, and he's quite a character. But before that, I want to reiterate that you are listening to Gary Wheeler's High Strangeness show on WRFR. 93.3 FM Rockland, and 99.3 FM Camden. And I'd also want to thank my sponsors, Diverse Landscapes in Rockland and Eric Best, who is an author and business consultant. I appreciate your support. Now to Callahan.
I'm one of those what you would call the high government official in the FAA. I was a division chief. There was only 3 or 4 down from the admiral. I became the branch chief for the quality control. The quality control branch later on became a division, and I became a division chief, and they called it the Accidents Investigations Branch in Washington, D.C. We investigated all the airline incidences, all the accidents. I stayed there for about 6 years and then retired. The way it started is there was a 747, a Japanese airline, 747 was coming from the northwest going across the Alaskan territory. And he was at either 31, 33, or 35,000 feet. And it was, I want to say around 11 o'clock at night, but you can check the real times. He called and asked the controller if the controller had any traffic at his altitude. And the controller said no. Basically, it was a midnight operation. They didn't have too much traffic. And he said, well, something like I have a target at my 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock position, about 8 miles. Now, in the 747, they have radar in the nose that picks up the weather outside there. So his radar is picking up a target. He sees this target with his eye, and the target, the way he described it, was a huge ball with lights running around it, and I think he said it was like 4 times as big as a 747. Well, on the day I'm doing PERs, I got behind, and I told the secretary not to bother me, I'm doing PERs. And a few minutes later, the phone's ringing, and then she wouldn't stop calling. So I asked what was going on. She said, you got to talk to the people in Alaska. So I said, all right. So I forgot who it was that called. But he says, we got a problem here. I don't know what to tell the media. The whole office is full of the media from Alaska. What's the problem? He says, well, it's that UFO. I said, what UFO? He says, well, we last week we had a UFO chase a 747 across the skies up here for about 30 minutes or so, and we didn't think too much of it. He says, but apparently the word got out, and we have all these news people here, and we want to know what to tell them. So being an old government employee, I told him what you always tell them, is tell them it's under investigation, and then get all that data together. I wanted all the discs that they had and all the tapes that they had available, and flown overnight to the tech center at Atlantic City. But they called the military, and they told the military they wanted all their tapes. We also control, the FAA controls all the airspace above the United States and its territory. It doesn't belong to the military, it doesn't belong to the guys shooting the rockets off. It belongs to the United States government, and it's controlled by the FAA. Nobody moves in this airspace unless we get the approval. So I told them to get the military's tapes and all their data and ship that down. Well, they called back an hour or so later, and they said the military said they were short on the tapes, and they had to put them back in service, and it's only been 12 days. So the administrator sent, my boss was the associate director, Harvey Safir. Sounds like Safer, but it's Safir. Sent him and me to Atlantic City to look at this thing to see if he had something to worry about. So we went in and told him that we wanted this room set up to be just like it was in Anchorage, and we wanted all that data to come to this scope, and we wanted to see everything the controller seen, we wanted to hear everything he heard, and we wanted it all tied together, the radar, the digital radar, and the sound. Found out later that some of the people that were working on that side of the fence that were displaying this had already reviewed the tapes and didn't feel comfortable in showing us what was on there. But they ran it through. When the air traffic controller had asked the military man, do you see anything? The military guy says, yes, I have a target at such and such. 1 o'clock and 8 miles from the Japanese pilot, 747. The military man said something like, yeah, I see him 35 miles north of Anchorage, and who's that at 11 or 1 o'clock in his position? And FAA controller said, I don't have anybody. Do you have anybody? He said, it's not mine. And he came back and said, we have no traffic here. And a couple times during the operation, the Japanese pilot would say he's now at 11 o'clock, he's now at 1 o'clock, he's now at 3 o'clock. He was bouncing around, this guy here. And when he would say that, the military guy would cut in and say he's now at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and he would confirm the position. The military controller has what they call height-finding radar, and they have long-range radar and short-range radar. So if they don't catch it on one of their systems, they catch it on the other. And if you listen to the military man, at one time he said, I have it on the height radar, or my range radar, whatever he called it, which indicated that he had a target on his system. Ours wouldn't record it. While they ran through for the best part of 31 minutes, the UFO would be in one position or the other, following our Japanese 747. After a while, they changed his altitude. It still stayed with him. They gave him a 360. When you're a 747, you make a 360, it takes you a few minutes to turn around. You cover a lot of space. It still stayed with him. It was either in the front, on the side, or behind him.
Zero, I approved 1628 to make deviations as necessary for traffic. The traffic stayed with 1628 through turns and descents in the vicinity of Fairbanks. I requested 1628 make a right 360.
They would see that the target be at 1 o'clock and 7 or 8 miles, and then next it would be in the next sweep, which would be like 10 seconds later, it would be behind him 7 or 8 miles, and it always stayed 7 or 8 miles away from the target when it was all done. And we went back to Washington the next day. The administrator had called down and wanted to know if he had a problem or not. And my boss had told him, well, we took a video of it, and it looks like there might have been something there. Well, his thing was, can you come up and give us a quick 5-minute rundown? What happened? So we go up to the 10th floor, and in the conversation of a 4 or 5 minute debriefing, the administrator, which was Ingen at the time, Admiral Ingen, he said, well, we got that video with you, can you show me the video? And I said, yeah, and then you just plug it in and play it. So we plugged it in for him. He started watching it, and after about 5 minutes, he told the staff, I cancel my, he had a meeting with someone in 15 minutes. He says, first he said, I'll be late, and then next it was cancel, and then I'm going to be here till this is over. So we watched the whole thing in just over half an hour. And we got
this was the administrator of FAA?
The administrator of the FAA. We got all done. He says, what do you guys think? Well, I guess that's why he was the service director and I wasn't. He gave a good political answer that said he wasn't sure what it was. Didn't know if it was anything. So his take was, don't talk to anybody. Don't talk to anybody until I give you the okay. The next day, I got a call from someone with the scientific study group or the CIA, I'm not sure who it was the first time. And they wanted to know, they had some questions about the incident. And I said, I know what you're talking about. You probably want to call the Admiral. Well, a few minutes later, the Admiral calls down and says, I set up a briefing tomorrow morning at 9 or 10 o'clock, what it was. In the round room, bring all the stuff you have, and bring everybody up there, and give them whatever they want. And we want to get out of it. Just let them do whatever they want to do with it. So I brought all the people from the tech center. We went upstairs. We had all kinds of boxes of data that we had them print out. Filled up the room. They brought in 3 people from the FBI, 3 people from the CIA, and 3 people from Reagan's scientific study team, and I don't know who the rest of the people were. But they were all excited. We gave them the video, let them watch the video. Then I had they had all kinds of questions about the frequencies,
Okay, I'm going to pause this interview with Callahan for a few minutes because we have a caller, actually our first caller, and I'm going to put her on the line now.
Yes, hi Gary, this is Catherine from Appleton.
Hello, Catherine.
And I love your theme song. Is that going to be it every week? The contact song? Hello?
Hello, Catherine. I'm sorry. This is, for some reason, the system is backing up. I don't know why.
Well, should I just go ahead and talk anyway? Okay. Gary? Okay, well, I'll just talk. It sounds like I'm being recorded, or I'm on the radio.
Antenna turning, on and on and on. How many radars, how many antennas, how did data get processed? They were all excited. The only way a man would be if that was his job. When they got done, they actually swore all these other guys into that this never took place. We never had this meeting, and this was never recorded. Now, what I tried to tell you before...
Who said that? Who was saying this?
This was one of the guys from the CIA, okay? That they were never there, this never happened. When I asked them at the time, I said, well, I don't know why you're saying this. I mean, it's... if there was something there, and if it's not the stealth bomber, then, you know, it's a UFO. And if it's a UFO, why wouldn't you want the people to know? Oh, they get all excited over that. You don't even want to say those words. He said this is the first time they ever had 30 minutes of radar data on a UFO, and they're all itching to get their hands into the data and to find out what it is and what really goes. And if they come out and told the American public that they ran into a UFO out there, it would cause panic across the country, so therefore you can't talk about it. And they're taking all this data. So I said, okay, take all that data. That's what you want.
Who took the data?
Well, that group. I don't know who it went to, but that group took it. But they took only what we had there. They didn't ask me if there was anything else that I had. They said they're taking all this data. And I said, fine. Now, I had the original video that I took, and I had the pilot's report that came through, the first report, and I had the FAA's first report that was all downstairs on my table. They didn't ask for that, so I didn't give it to them. And later on, when I retired, that was the stuff that was in my office, and all that came with me, and we've been sitting on that ever since. So we watched the whole thing. Now, what happened at the end is the Japanese 747 is leaving the airspace. There's a United coming up to land in Alaska. The controller says to United, we've got a Japanese 747 up here that is being chased, followed by a UFO. We'd like you to check him out. Can we leave you at the altitude? And the United says, fine, or sure. And so they give him a left turn, 20 degrees or so, keep him at his altitude, and they kind of run him in toward the Japanese 747. And once the two airplanes pass, that target follows the United down through the airspace until he gets on final and then disappears. When they read the reports that come through, the FAA has to protect themselves, so you can't say you saw a target, even though this is what he said. So he made him change his report to position symbols, which makes it sound like it wasn't really a target. Well, if that's not a target, then a lot of the other position symbols that we're separating from aren't targets either. And when I read that, I thought, there's something fishy here, that somebody's worried about something rather than they're trying to cover up. When the CIA told us that this never happened and we never had this meeting, I believe it was because they didn't want the public to know that this was going on. Normally, we would put out some type of a news release that such and such happened. Did I think it was mysterious that the military tapes disappeared? It wasn't right. We went from 30 days to 15 days, and the first indication makes it look like it must have been a military operation that they were doing up there, or the military knew more than we did about who the visitors were, and they didn't want anybody else to know. And of course, the people that are involved at the lower levels don't really know what's going on above them. When someone calls up and says, put those tapes back in service, they just put them back in service. They really don't care. When they asked me what I thought, I told them that it looked like we had a UFO that was up there. The reason it wasn't on the FAA's tapes was because it was too large of an aircraft, and it was picked up as weather, so we wouldn't record it. That the Japanese pilot seen it. The Japanese pilot drew pictures of it. Eventually, they gave the Japanese pilot a hard time because of what he said he was embarrassing his country. Our military controllers said they seen it. Our FAA controllers said they seen it. Our FAA controllers, after a period of time, came back and said they really didn't see a target. They saw something else, which makes it sound like somebody is helping them fill out the reports, and therefore that looks suspicious.
During the period of 2030, I was on duty and I was working the D-50. I'm making this statement to clarify certain points in my original statement on November 19th. This was January the 6th.
My guess is, because of the way it was, it's not part of the military's operation anymore, that it was a UFO. But who do you tell that you were involved in a UFO incident without them looking at you like you ain't wrapped too tight? And this is, I think, is the way our country is set up now. If someone comes out and says, I saw a UFO on TV, the only ones that see a UFO in the TV programs are the rednecks out in the country that are going coon hunting or alligator hunting at night. You don't find anybody with any kind of smarts or some professional individual saying, hey, last night, let me tell you what I saw. They don't display that in the United States. So if you talk about seeing a UFO, you're putting yourself in a funny kind of a category. That's probably one reason why you don't hear about it anymore. As far as I'm concerned, I saw a UFO chase a Japanese 747 across the sky for over half an hour on radar.
And see, all these little hits are something that they have to explain all the time.
If you can go within it was a 10-second radar, so at 1 o'clock and 7 miles, you see them, and then 10 seconds later, or even not even 10 seconds later, it's less than 10 seconds, because when the system got southwest of the sweep got southwest of the Japanese 747, it picked them up again, so it would go from 1 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles to 6, 7 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles inside of 4 or 5 seconds. You have to be moving pretty quickly. And it's faster than anything that I know of in our government.
It's 2:30, 6:50. Okay, we're right on time. We're close enough.
I've been involved in a lot of cover-ups with the FAA. When we gave the presentation to the Reagan staff, I was behind the group that was there, and when they were speaking to the people in the room, they had all those people swear that this never happened. They never had me swear it never happened. It always bothered me that we have these things going on, and when you see something or you hear something on radio or TV, the news, that it's put down as it's not there. I have a hard time saying nothing because it's not there. When I first told those that I knew about this, it just died. I mean, nothing ever happens. So you look at it kind of funny, like, and it still bothers me that I've seen all this, I know all this, and like I'm walking around like with the answer, and nobody wants to ask the question to get the answer, and it kind of irritates me a little bit. And I don't believe our government should be set up that way. I think when we have something like this, that you could probably find out more about what's going on in the world. If they can travel that far, that distance, with that type of machinery, who knows what they could do here for the health of the nation, of the people, the food they could give them, the cancers we could cure. They have to know more than us to be able to travel in that speed. I sure would like to know what's going on. And that's one reason why I'm not afraid to talk about what's happening. What I can tell you is what I seen with my own eyes, and I said, I've got a videotape, I've got I got the voice tape, I've got the reports that were filed that will confirm what I've been telling you. Those people that say that if these UFOs existed, then someday would be on radar and that to be professionals would see it, then I can tell them that back in 1986 there were enough professional people that saw it. It was brought down to headquarters, FAA headquarters, Washington, D.C. The administrators seen the tape of it. The people that we were debriefing, they've all seen. Reagan Scientific Study Team, the three of those professors, doctors, they've seen it. As far as I was concerned, they were the ones that verified my own thoughts about it. They were very, very excited about the data. They had said at that time this was the only time, and they had used the words, a UFO was ever recorded on radar for any length of time where it's 30-some minutes, and they have all this data to look at. Now, a 30-minute radar return filled up boxes across the thing, and the boxes were stacked 2 or 3 high. There was a lot of paper data to look at. They knew the frequency now of the radar. They knew how fast it turned. They knew where it was. They had the military that confirmed it. And when I gave them my card, the CIA guy said, we're with the company. They don't say CIA. And the company, we don't have cards. We don't have company cards. They may have a card, but it's nothing to do with the company. And he said that there's nothing we can give out. I'm sure on the Admiral's calendar, they have who reserved that, or they should have, who reserved the room and who was there for the day of the briefing. Even the Admiral had to talk about it wherever he went because he canceled too many meetings to watch this thing here. And it was late at night when we got back. We got back at either 4:30, 4:45. And, he canceled his meetings. And to me, that meant that he thought it was something to say. We had a government investigator come by checking just a few weeks ago, checking on an individual that we know for his security clearance with the CIA. And she's with the CIA checking on him to make sure he's an okay guy. And during this period of time, I had said, well, I've been involved with the CIA one other time, and what was that? So when I started giving her this UFO thing, you could see her look, like she's in the room with 2 kooks, and like, can I get out of here safe? It's the only thing you could see on her face. And it was panic. And I'm thinking, that's the way the rules are. But I think that's the way the government wants the outside people to view those that have seen something like this. Like they are kooks, they're not wrapped too tight, and you got to watch out for them. That's the image that they put out. I guess I really don't care about the image, but I do feel like they had something and that we've seen it.
That's a pretty good example of what occurs when almost a smoking gun is presented to the government, and they choose to basically cover it up and not present it to the media or the public. And I respect somebody like Callahan coming forward and after his retirement and putting himself in jeopardy slightly to talk about these things. This particular example is a good one, as I say, because pilots are very respected as far as their ability to know what is in the sky and what they can identify and what they can identify. So Callahan is to be respected for what he did. I want to take a second to apologize to the caller. I know the caller who tried to call the station. I could talk to her in here, but I couldn't get her on air. And as I say, I'm a newbie here. And what I realized later is a button that had been pushed that I hadn't known about, and it apparently blocked her going on air. So again, I apologize to her, and hopefully she'll call next week. I have talked to her off air, and I know she has a lot of information to share with people around the whole UFO issue. Also, in line with the kind of government cover-up that was spoken of by Callahan, there is an author and a historian named Richard Dolan, D-O-L-A-N, who has written a series of books basically titled The UFO and the National Security State. And the books are kind of divided up into time periods since the Roswell incident back in the 40s all the way up to the present, about how the government has gone about covering up the UFO proof, basically, of their presence. So he's a very good source to look into if you're curious about the stories behind that. I'm getting kind of close to going off the air, so I appreciate you listening, and in closing, I'm going to play a little bit more of John Williams' theme from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Good night.
Kind of turning on and on and on. How many radars?